All right, folks, so this is the brand new G-Shock Move GBD-H1000 from Casio. So this outdoor-focused GPS-enabled watch is going to be the first G-Shock watch that's going to have a built-in wrist-based optical heart rate sensor. But along with that, they also included training features like VO2 max, training status, recovery time, and a bit more. You probably already noticed that I put May of 2020 in the title of this video, and I did that pretty deliberately just because as of right now, the software is rather fresh, or maybe not quite ripe yet, and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about here in just one second. This is most definitely an in-depth review, but this is just chapter 1, and I want to do a follow-up video later on down the road when the software is more built out. So make sure to subscribe to get a notification when that video comes out. This is Casio's first more serious attempt at getting into the fitness and sports space, so this is totally to be expected, and I do expect there to be updates in the future, hopefully based off of some of the stuff I say in this video. But still, just like all my other reviews, I tested this really thoroughly using it for running, mountain biking, road biking, indoor cycling, as well as strength training and high-intensity interval training, just so you can get a better idea if it's going to work for you. So if this video does help you out at all, make sure to hit that like button down below, as it definitely helps the channel out a lot, and I appreciate it. So first, we're going to take a really up-close look at the device, then we're going to take a full tour of all the menus as well as the workout interface, and then we'll wrap things up with all the testing that I've been doing over the last 3 to 4 weeks. So there's going to be a few different color options when it's going to be available, and in front of me I have the white version. So inside the box is going to be a nicely wrapped watch, and we'll put that aside for the moment. Inside the box, there's a USB charging cable as well as a bunch of manuals and stuff. But now onto the really good stuff, so let's check out the watch itself. With the design, it's very unique, and I would say that you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. If you're a longtime G-Shock fan, you're probably going to dig this thing a lot. And it is on the larger end of things, and when I say that, I mean it's probably one of the largest watches I've probably ever put on. It's going to weigh 101 grams, which isn't necessarily the lightest thing around, but it is built for that extreme durability, being both shock resistant as well as vibration resistant. The construction is going to be a combination of plastic as well as stainless steel, and the design of this watch may be polarizing, but it's supposed to be functional, where that complex shape is designed to prevent direct shock to the mineral glass display and the rest of the device, like the buttons, which have a nice grippy texture to them. On the watch band right here is where it shows it has 5 sensors, including a heart rate sensor, barometric altimeter, compass, temperature, as well as a 3-axis accelerometer. Oh, and the watch band isn't the softest thing around, but it works just fine. And then on the stainless steel back of the device, here's where you're going to find the optical heart rate sensor as well as the charging port. In regards to battery life, Casio advertises that you can get up to 14 hours of use with normal GPS reception, and then up to 18 hours if you choose the long mode, which reduces the accuracy but increases the length of the activity that you can do. However, in terms of day-to-day use, if you weren't going to be using GPS or heart rate, it's supposed to last up to 12 months for all the regular watch functions, and then up to 34 months if you enable a power-saving mode. Obviously, I haven't been able to test the long-term battery life since I've only had this for about a month, but I can say that the GPS battery life does seem to be pretty close to advertised. Okay, so now let's dive into all the functions of this device. The default display is going to have your basic date and time information along with battery life. If you press the upper left-hand key, it'll toggle through different displays, and you can sort of think of these as different watch faces that show different types of information. This screen shows your daily activity levels, and then you can see your history throughout the week. And then along the bottom will be the date and the time. The next screen will show your training status, VO2 max, and recovery time. And then the next screen will show your activity level achievement for the last 6 months. The next shows your current heart rate as well as your minimum and maximum heart rate for the day. However, just note that you'll have to make sure that the heart rate setting within the accompanying smartphone app is set to always on for this to work, or it won't display anything. And then the last screen shows a second time zone, which I have set to UTC, but you can customize this in the watch settings, which I'll show you here in just a bit. Press the upper left-hand button again, and it cycles back to the default watch face. Then there's going to be different modes that you'll access using the lower left-hand button. The first will be your heart rate, and this does seem to work without having to change that setting in the app that I mentioned earlier. Next is going to be a workout interval timer. You'll be able to set up to 5 different workout timers with up to 20 sets within each timer. So on this first workout, I have it set to 5 seconds for each set that repeats 3 times. You can edit the repeats and times by holding the upper left-hand key for about 2 seconds on this screen. Here's where you can edit how many times it repeats as well as the duration per set. Next up is going to be a stopwatch, which is a stopwatch, and then you'll have an ABC function that displays a compass, an altimeter, and barometer, which you can toggle through with the upper left-hand button. And by the way, I do live right around 5,000 feet of elevation, so that looks to be right in line. After that's going to be your activity history. It's going to show your total stats for the month, and then you can dive in to see activity details. So as an example, for this run right here, it shows the total time as well as lap times, and then you can dive in even further where it'll show your distance, time, pace, calories, cadence, ascent, descent, average and maximum heart rate, as well as the aerobic and anaerobic training effect for that particular activity. After the training log is going to be your training status. So if you press the upper left-hand key on the screen, it'll cycle through, and then it'll also show your VO2 max as well as your suggested recovery time. Right now, the training status and VO2 max are actually lining up with another device, but these figures actually can be thrown off, and I'll have more details about that a little bit later in the video. The final mode will be your notifications, and here's an example of a few different types of notifications. You can't reply or anything like that from the watch itself, and these are just going to be one-way notifications. Now, before we get into this run button over here, I'll just quickly go through the general watch settings, which you'll access by holding down the upper left-hand key for about 2 seconds from a watch face. The first setting is where you can adjust your home time zone, where you'll choose your city, and then you can enable or disable daylight savings time. Then you can adjust the time where you can have it be automatically based off of GPS, or you can set it manually if you wish. Next is where you can set an alternate time zone, which is what we saw earlier where I had it set to UTC, but you do have the ability to set these to one of 38 different time zones. Next is where you can set up some alarms, and then the next setting will be your profile information, and here's where you can adjust your height and weight, sex, birth date, as well as right or left wrist orientation. You'll also have a setting to enable or disable automatic run detection, which is supposed to just automatically start tracking when you start running without having to manually press the run button, and I'll show you how well that works here in just a bit. Then you can adjust the sounds on the device for both just operating the device in general as well as notifications. You can set the backlight timeout setting to auto or between a couple different durations, which I think are a little bit short. You can set your preference for vibrations, which are similar to the beep settings. Here's where you can pair or unpair your smartphone. You can also enable airplane mode. There's also going to be a phone finder function. You can set up your unit preferences between imperial and metric, and then you can finally reset the device as well as see some really exciting regulatory information. So to start an activity, you'll press this run button on the side. You'll notice that it just starts to acquire a GPS signal. Currently has one and only one activity profile, which is basically different than any other fitness and sports focused watch in the market today. So you can't choose between, let's say, running versus cycling versus hiking, or even an indoor versus an outdoor activity. And this does pose a few issues, which we'll get to here in just a bit. Anyhow, let's just go ahead and start the activity and then check out the data pages. And these can be customized, by the way, in the app. The first page shows your split time, total distance, as well as pace. If you press the upper left-hand key, it'll toggle to show your lap times and stats. Press it again, and it'll show your heart rate, total ascent, and calories. And then press the upper left-hand button again, and it cycles back to your split time, total distance, and pace. While you're in an activity, it sort of works the same way the watch works in just normal everyday mode, where the upper left-hand key cycles through different displays, and then the lower left-hand key cycles through different functions or modes. If you press the mode key, a heart rate graph will show up, and then here's what it actually looks like during an actual activity. You can then cycle through this mode using the upper left-hand button, where it has a different type of display for your heart rate, including your target zone. Press it again, and it'll show your pace. If you press that mode button again, it then goes to the ABC mode, and then you can cycle through the compass, altimeter, and barometer. And then this last mode is an altimeter navigation mode that shows your current altitude along the left, with the difference in altitude and estimated time to each checkpoint. And you can cycle through these with different checkpoints with the upper left-hand button, and you'll set the checkpoints up in the smartphone app. So that's a full tour of the watch, and now let's get into how this device performs in the fitness and sports capacity, including GPS, heart rate, as well as the altimeter. Now, just a note, I usually like to download the data files from a device like this and then upload them to a more detailed analysis tool where I can compare them with up to 3 to 5 other devices, but that functionality isn't available right now, but still, I'll be showing you plenty of information in this video, which should give you a pretty good idea of how this device is going to perform. So let's first start with running. On this run here, the distance lined up pretty closely to 2 other test devices, no complaints here. It can also track cadence, and that looked good. And then the heart rate lined up pretty well with both average as well as maximum heart rate. In regards to calories, it was a little bit low for what I would expect out of a 4-mile run at this intensity, but we'll have more examples as we move on. While we're talking about running, let's also talk about that automatic run detection setting, which I showed you all earlier. So with this setting enabled, it'll automatically detect when you start running without having to manually press that run key, and I found this to work fairly well. It starts to recognize that you're running astonishingly fast, actually, usually within about 10 to 15 seconds of starting to run. When it starts to recognize that you're running, it'll change the watch face display to show the distance as well as your pace on top of the screen. And then when you're done with your run, it seems to take about 30 to 45 seconds to automatically save the activity. In terms of the accuracy, I compared this to another device that I manually started and stopped, and it was about 5/100ths of a mile off, which is pretty respectable, but the time that I thought I was running was off by about 20 seconds. As of right now, it appears that it just utilizes the built-in accelerometer and doesn't automatically turn on GPS, as it does not provide a map of the run after the fact. Next up, let's take a look at some mountain biking. So on this ride here, the distance came up a bit short, being about 1/3 of a mile short if you were to average out the distance on the other 3 devices. In regards to elevation, since it does have that barometric altimeter, these numbers lined up pretty well. And then for heart rate, I was rather impressed here, as mountain biking is one of the most challenging activities for a wrist-based optical heart rate sensor, since there's going to be a lot of jostling and movement, but these numbers looked pretty good. As another example, here's another ride, and the distance was about 1/4 mile low. Elevation was a little bit high on this ride, but nothing that I would call bad by any means. Heart rate was a little more off in this ride, but still totally within the same ballpark for average, and then tracked the maximum a little bit high, but the calorie calculation was pretty close. So now let's take a quick peek at some road biking, and then we'll move on to some indoor activities, and that's where things get a lot more interesting. The distance on this road ride was good to go, very much in line with 3 other test devices. Calories were a smidge low, and then elevation was a smidge high. Again, nothing that I would call bad by any means. For heart rate, the average was in line, but the maximum tracked rather high here, being about 20 or so beats per minute higher than some other external heart rate monitors. Now onto some indoor cycling, and here's where things get a little bit interesting. On this indoor ride right here, we can see that the average heart rate lines up, but then we see that the max heart rate was much higher, and I definitely don't have a max heart rate of over 200. The watch at this time doesn't seem to have the ability to pair to external sensors like a speed and cadence sensor or any other sensor for that matter, and I actually haven't gotten an answer whether that's planned, but I really hope that's possible, and I'd love to see that. But since it can't pair to speed and cadence sensors for indoor cycling, that's why this example just shows 0.11 miles traveled, and this leads to a bigger issue that eagle-eyed viewers may have already noticed. It says that I burned 40 calories for this hour and 7-minute bike ride. At an average heart rate of 150 beats per minute for over an hour, that's definitely not 40 calories burned. So what that means is that the calorie calculations are being based off of distance and not heart rate. So there's clearly some work that needs to be done there. And then just to back that up, I have another example here where the average heart rate was right in line and the maximum was a little bit higher than the other 2 devices. But again, if we look at the calorie calculations, it says that I burned a measly 22 calories for this workout that was over an hour long. And what I do want to point out is that I did not track distance on these other 2 devices. And for one final example, let's check out weight training and high intensity interval training. Although the average and max heart rate were comparable for the duration of the session, the heart rate actually did fall apart a bit on the second half of the session. So on the first half of the workout, things were lining up pretty close to a chest heart rate monitor. It was about 2 to 5 beats per minute off from the warm-up all the way to a little bit higher intensity. But then for some reason on the second half of the workout, things started to go astray and it wasn't picking up the higher heart rate. And again, if we look at the calorie calculation, that definitely isn't right. Strength training is a pretty challenging activity for almost all wrist-based optical heart rate sensors just because there's a lot of arm movement and a lot of wrist flexion. So this is kind of to be expected, but overall, I'd say that a heart rate is looking pretty decent other than maybe some of the high heart rate that was tracked during the indoor cycling. Lastly, let's wrap things up by talking about some of the training features like training status, training load, as well as VO2 max. So after a handful of runs, it produced a VO2 max value that was somewhat close to my estimated VO2 max for running that's being calculated on another device that I know to be somewhat accurate. So that's the good news. But the bad news is after that, I went on a few bike rides and the VO2 max value dropped. VO2 max for running can be calculated off of distance as well as heart rate, but cycling VO2 max, you're going to need heart rate as well as the power output from a cycling power meter. At this time, the watch doesn't pair to any cycling power meters. That said, the VO2 max probably shouldn't have been updated since I wasn't actually running. So if a device doesn't know your cycling power output, the VO2 max can be thrown way off. And that's why, at least with some other devices, VO2 max is going to be separated out from running versus cycling. The VO2 max value on this watch is somewhat believable if you're only running outside. If you're doing anything other than running outside, that's probably going to get thrown off, and I did experience that. There will be other training features from First Beat technology that are built into this device, like training status, training load, and recovery time. And for the most part, it always was telling me fairly okay results, but the recovery times seem to just be a little bit high. So what's the early verdict on the G-Shock Move GBD-H1000 from Casio? Well, first off, I would say that they did a pretty good job implementing that heart rate sensor, and the results seemed pretty decent, so kudos on that for sure. GPS was also pretty good, but did come up a little bit short on some of those longer activities, and then the barometric altimeter actually performed pretty well. But where this watch is coming up short at this time is going to be the software, and that's going to be centered around the fact that it has that one and only one activity profile, and that kind of snowballs into some of the other issues like the calorie calculations not being correct for indoor activities, as well as the VO2 max values that can be thrown off if you're doing anything other than running outdoors. This is Casio's first more serious attempt at getting into the fitness and sports space, and I'm definitely taking that into account. I think they've actually done a pretty good job with the hardware, but where I want to see this go is for them to build out the software a lot more. So that's the in-depth review of the GBD-H1000 as it sits right now. And I tried to go over a lot in this video, but if you do have any questions, leave those in the comment section down below. And on your way down there, hit that like button if you found this video informative or useful, and also make sure to subscribe for plenty more sports technology videos that are coming soon. In the meantime, have fun, and we will see you in the next video.